I don't know how to describe this to you, but like all of this stuff is fake. I don't know how else to talk about it. Like constitutional law for the most part is an entire field that is dedicated to like normalizing reactionary psychopathic ideas under the auspices of like some kind of intelligent analysis, some kind of critical thinking. The entire purpose of of strict textualists and their legal constitutional analysis is a way for those guys to be able to just like drink cocktails with the liberal intelligentsia and act like they simply have an intellectual disagreement, and not one that is just a reactionary, incredibly biased, conservative agenda that they're advancing. That's where this comes from. It's silly. It's made up. Here, I'll use smaller words for you. Right-wing Supreme Court justices and their analysis of the Constitution is not a real interpretation, is not a real disagreement. It's simply them trying to find something in the text that goes, no, the founding fathers would agree with me. But it's not actually something that the founding fathers would agree with them on. It's just simply stating whatever the biased conservative argument they have and then looking for a supposedly intellectual and operating in an intellectual framework. A framework that didn't necessarily exist all that long ago. Okay, it is, a good word would be a veneer, I guess, but that's a big word too. I like to say the intellectual patina, but it's not. They're just looking at it and going, I don't think women should have bodily autonomy. I can't just straight up say that, so I have to make it seem like that. You are correct. For example, the Rahimi case coming up in SCOTUS term asked the question of whether someone convicted of domestic violence can purchase a firearm. There's nothing in the nation's history or tradition that allows such a person to get a firearm, yet we know exactly how the case is going to go. Exactly. And there are so many circumstances where the heavily right-wing supermajority Supreme Court has no real interpretation, no real strict originalist argument to make, or no strict like textualist argument to make. We already know exactly which way they're going to decide, and we have to sit around and play this song and dance as though like, no, you don't understand. They're really brilliant. They've read a lot of books. They read a lot of books on the law, and they have this well-defined worldview, and that's why they are deciding in this way. You simply do not understand. These 9 appointed lifetime position Supreme Court justices are too brilliant, and you can't comprehend it. You mean to tell me that they're simply operating on their own personal individual biases? Like you're telling me that they're just literally going, I'm right wing. What's the right wing position on this? Boom. That's it. No way. No shot. Except that is precisely what's going on.
What Jack Smith has done with his team is to point up a very important precedent, taking us all back to the summer of 1974 and the Watergate era and the tapes case. And what Jack Smith is saying here is that this court was able to handle that kind of urgent question back in 1974. The court said unanimously that Richard Nixon did not have absolute privilege to withhold those tapes. This kind of question is exactly of that magnitude now.
Hasanistan says, here's how I see this going. SCOTUS distinguishes this from Nixon and holds that the president is immune from any federal prosecution for actions during their time in office. It's distinguished from Nixon because Nixon only applies to civil proceedings. Very worrying. But that that means the president can do federal crimes while in office, which is insane. I guess technically the president does do federal crimes while he's in office. Let's be real. They already do that, but it's like wild to just be like, no, it's totally valid. You can do it, King. You have the go ahead. I don't know.
No, look, they can do it, and the Supreme Court can grant this. And as Paul had said, they have the clock on their minds here. And look, everybody knew that this was eventually going to make it to the Supreme Court in one way or another. Now, the normal course of action would be to go to the appeals court. That could take months and months, and they'd ultimately draft a decision there, and then which would be appealed to the Supreme Court. Parties are allowed to go straight to the Supreme Court. This is an important constitutional question. It's never been resolved, and that has nothing to do with Donald Trump. It is just
I feel like Jack Smith's a pretty smart guy and plays by the book. So I feel like if he didn't have at least some semblance of confidence that this would not, he probably looks at the Supreme Court, recognizes that it's a very political decision here. I assume he thinks that at a time when the Supreme Court is historically unpopular, more unpopular than ever, they're certainly scared of the way they're they're being viewed. They already handed like somewhat of a dub to the Democratic Party by acting out the 35-year, 40-year agenda of the Federalist Society against the will of the majority, the overwhelming majority opinion. The last two Supreme Court justices that were appointed the last three Supreme Court justices that were appointed straight up said they would never overturn because it's a super president. On the record, they said this. And then what did they do? They immediately overturned it. So that was a major blow to the confidence that people have within this institution, which they should. They should not be confident in this institution. I don't believe that this is a real institution that cares about the humanity of people, or they did not give Republicans a dub. Politically speaking, that decision was deeply unpopular. That decision was so unimaginably unpopular that it led Joe Biden in a relatively hollow defeat in the midterms when it was supposed to be a devastating red tide. Now, of course, Joe Biden is also very old and deeply unpopular due to how old he is. Let's be real. It's mostly because of how old he is. Hasanistan says, I think Jack Smith is backed into a corner. Trump will raise this regardless, and it would go through all the appeals process and would gradually get to SCOTUS. That would push the trial away past January 2025 for sure. I think this is the only way Jack Smith makes sure that these trials possibly end before the election. Trump knows the only way he gets out of this is if he pardons himself. This just speeds up the process. I mean, this would be a ginormous dub handed off to the Trump presidential campaign. Not letting this play out in the courts when there's a mountain of evidence as to the that Donald Trump did by simply just going, yeah, no, he has immunity in this time frame, so we can do whatever federal crimes he wants to, when there is so much evidence, like an unimaginable amount of evidence. When all of that is said and done, and the Supreme Court, which is incredibly biased in favor of Donald Trump, goes, yeah, no, he is the God King, actually. When you're the president, they let you do it. It's just crazy.
The reality is these are majority conservative justices, several appointed by Trump. I mean, the reality is they could say, yeah, he has immunity. You can't move forward with his case.
They could, but even before you get there, the very question of whether the Supreme Court takes this kind of case on is itself an open question.
Yeah, and just reading through the filing that just came in this afternoon, the special counsel is arguing nothing could be more vital to our democracy than that a president who abuses the electoral system to remain in office is held accountable for criminal conduct. I know that
I like to place this under like this is even too offensive for liberals category, right? Like, because liberals put up with a lot of shit. They put up with a lot of shit. They don't really care if the country is like more reactionary. Ultimately, they care about it because they make the mental calculus that like, will we have another Democratic reign in which, you know, we get to hurt the Republicans a little bit. We don't really care. They're very cynical about a lot of things. But this is, in many instances, a bridge too far until the media, of course, until the decisions come, and then the media has to play the role of normalizing this decision because that's their job. That's their role. Their role is to look at all of the psychotic that you experience, try to push against it, and then once the decision, when it's all said and done and the decision takes place, then they normalize it by being like, well, you know, maybe it's just fine. They have to spin it. But until that moment comes, they are going to say that this is completely offensive and unacceptable because it destroys the norms that you are supposedly defending.
It's huge because really the Trump legal strategy boils down to delay, delay, delay. And there was a hope that this constitutional question, which has never been decided before, would take a little while to get through the appellate process, possibly even go en banc, then go to the Supreme Court. And they hope that it could at least delay this trial, which has a ripple effect on other criminal trials, until after the election. So it's clear the special counsel is like, nope, we're going to try this option. This is aggressive. This is the first time they've gone to the Supreme Court. Now the question is whether the Supreme Court wants to do this, if they want to completely reject the request or meet them halfway. It's
really cool that they also literally are just like very openly corrupt, and they just put out like a press briefer talking about their ethics and their code of conduct, and it was just basically like nothing is changing. We are going to get wined and dined by whatever billionaire we want to. Suck my. And that's where we're at. It's cool. It's cool that they're not even trying to make it seem like they're impartial or not compromised. They're very compromised, and they're very open about it, and it doesn't really matter as long as you have enough money.
They too are probably mindful of the timeline here. So I would expect we'll hear from this soon, but they don't have a deadline.
Yeah. And it's just a reminder, right, of the collision between these legal cases and the fact that Trump is running for president, and we're in the lead up to the Iowa caucuses, right? And just today, he was going to testify and then pulled out last minute.
Pulls out last minute, doesn't show up. Looks like, okay, this case is wrapping up, but that doesn't mean his legal